Greetings Exiles, I'm DonTheCrown, and if you're looking for a build that's new, cheap, and effective, then this is the guide for you. This is my league starter from Heist League, and I managed to start farming tier 16s on a shoestring budget on the very first day of the league. In this guide, I'm going to go over all of the details of the build, while also answering some of the most frequently asked questions I get over at my stream. This build uses two separate main skills, Splitting Steel for clearing and Lancing Steel for tough bosses. If you want something of a middle ground, you can use Shattering Steel, but since it's just a 1-gem swap between Splitting and Lancing Steel, I don't really mind switching. The only time I would recommend using Shattering Steel is when you're doing some extremely beefy content like Delirium Orb tier 16s or Simulacrum. Outside of that, Splitting Steel should clear well enough, and Call of Steel should help clear up any rares that survive your initial attacks. That brings us to Call of Steel. Call of Steel is a brand new skill that is granted to you anytime you have any of the 3 steel skills active in your gear. When used, it will cause any nearby impaled enemy, alive or dead, to release their stored impale damage in an explosion. Because of this, I only need to attack once or twice before using Call to wipe out an entire pack. Call of Steel will also grant you 4 steel shards and will continue to generate 4 shards every half second until you reach the max of 12 or you consume a shard. Each of the steel skills will consume shards to empower their attacks. Without shards, steel skills are weak, so using Call of Steel is mandatory. Call of Steel will also grant you 1 shard per impale you remove, so reaching max stacks while map clearing should be easy. The real trick is that a champion who's using a Watcher's Eye for impales to last 2 additional hits will be able to recover a total of 12 shards from a single boss. This is incredibly useful for single target DPS with Lancing Steel. We're going to be using the new Lord of Steel jewel in our build. There are 3 different variants, but we only want to use either of the 2 that has increased use speed for Call of Steel. This can lower the use time of the skill down to a quarter second, which makes the build feel a lot less clunky. Splitting and Shattering Steel should both clear packs with 1 or 2 attacks and then a call. When going for single target, you can attack until you're out of shards, then call twice. This should give you almost 12 shards to attack with. Since Lancing Steel consumes 4 shards with each attack, that means 3 attacks and then 2 calls. This can feel somewhat clunky, however, you do get used to it. All 3 skills have a corresponding helmet enchantment that gives it a chance to not consume shards. While this sounds nice in theory, it is rather difficult to track your steel shards in the heat of battle. Hopefully, GGG provides some updated UI features for us in the future, but for now, these helmet enchantments kind of feel lackluster. Now, if you're worried that Call of Steel is causing you to lose impale damage, let me reassure you that nothing could be further from the truth. I'm going to be doing an updated impale video, but here's a primer. Normally when you hit with an impaling hit, you leave behind an impale that releases damage over the next 5 hits. So your first 5 hits are ramping up your damage while you get to the point that you have 5 impales ticking on every hit. Note that this is different from having stacks of bleed or poison. There's no actual hard cap to impales, it just normally works out to the same amount of total hits as an impale can last. Heist League did introduce some new mechanics that can apply multiple impales per hit, but they're rather uncommon for now. Champions get Master of Metal, which increases the number of hits an impale can last by 2, and there's a similar effect on Watcher's Eye Jewel. Call of Steel bypasses the need for you to hit multiple times to get the full damage out of an impale. When an impale is consumed, you will do damage equal to the stored damage times the number of hits they have left. So you can hit 1 time and then Call of Steel to do the full damage of that particular impale, and adding additional hits only increases the damage done. This means you'll always be getting the full value out of your impales when you use Call of Steel. Even if you kill enemies, you can still use the impales on their corpses to deal damage to things nearby. The only downside is that your individual hits might feel a little bit weaker. Also, you should not, for any reason, use the Impaler keystone with a steel build. While this keystone does help with clearing, it will drastically hurt your single target DPS. Impaler gives you 5 impales every 4 seconds, so as long as you have an attack speed greater than 1.25, you'll be losing damage. Also, splitting steel is so insane for clear that you pretty much want to focus on just stacking single target damage. If your clear is bad, then you're probably messing something up. For links, my primary damage links for both splitting and lancing steel are Impale, Brutality, Vicious Projectiles, Maim, and Greater Multiple Projectiles. Greater Multiple Projectiles will increase the number of secondary projectiles for splitting steel, while lancing steel will triple the amount of projectiles added from GMP or any other source. Needless to say, the awakened versions of GMP, Vicious Projectiles, and Brutality are superior to their non-awakened versions. For auras, I'm using Flesh and Stone, War Banner, Precision, and Pride. These auras are a bit strange because I'm using War Banner for accuracy and increased damage taken, and I sit in Sand Stance the entire time for defense. The increased damage from Blood Stance doesn't actually stack with our Maim support, so switching to Blood Stance doesn't give us too much of a damage increase. If you want to go more Glass Cannon, consider switching Flesh and Stone for Herald of Purity. Also, your precision level should be determined by your mana and accuracy. Don't reserve too much if that is hard to attack, but you also want to cap your hit chance if you can. For movement skills, I prefer Leap Slam, and you can support it with faster attacks, Blood Magic, Culling Strike, and Endurance Charge on melee stun if you have the links. Other support skills I recommend are Blood Rage, Steel Skin, and Sniper's Mark. I personally keep Steel Skin on my left click, so it'll just cast on cooldown. Sniper's Mark is my curse of choice because it is massive damage, and it allows you to focus fire bosses and metamorphs, and Sniper's Mark will just annihilate any adds that come into the fight. Lastly, I have a cast when damage taken, Flesh Offering, Stormbrand with Power Charge on crit set up to both destroy porcupines before their spikes can murder me and to generate power charges. Lastly, Enduring Cry can be nice for some endurance charges, but it is somewhat slow and might not be worth your time. Ancestral Protector can increase your attack speed and can be used to bait scary heist doorways to attack. Overall, if you're looking to cut down the number of buttons on your build, you can drop these 2 skills. For passives, we're using a standard crit sword tree with a good amount of life. Iron Grip and Point Blank Keystones increase our damage, and Acrobatics adds another layer of defenses. If you want more defenses, then filling out to phase Acrobatics can help. If you decide to use Lancing Steel, then you want to get an additional 20% chance to impale from either the passive tree or Dread Banner. For Ascendancy points, grab Master of Metal first, and then First to Strike, Last to Fall, lastly head out to Fortitude. I've included several leveling trees in the POB, which you can access by clicking down here. I did check to see if Cluster Jewels would be good, but I think you're better off without them. Let's go over what gear you're going to need. We're using a Terminus S Unique Sword, which is currently costing around 2 to 5 Chaos for good rolls. You also want a 6-link body armor. I prefer to hand in Celestial Justicar cards for an item level 80 Astral Plate, but you could buy a 6-link with 4 green, 2 red for rather cheap. The Astral will make balancing resistances easier, but getting the proper colors is a little bit of a hassle. The last mandatory item is a Lord of Steel jewel with call use time. The rest of your gear can focus on life and resistance, and I highly recommend getting at least 2 minus cost of non-channeling skills crafted on your rings or amulet. You can buy these or have somebody craft them for you. Another thing to note is that this is a crit based build, so you should always have a diamond flask. For gear upgrades, I would recommend getting the Nomad belt. You can usually craft these yourself by buying the Prophecy and a good base belt. After that, upgrading to a Rislathos coil is expensive and the damage increase is minor, but you'll gain a lot of life over the Nomad. For flasks, Bottled Faith and Dying Sun are both solid upgrades. Dying Sun won't help your clear too much, but for Lancing Steel single target, it adds a staggering 6 projectiles, making it the best in slot flask. A Watcher's Eye with Impales you inflict last 2 additional hits while using Pride will likely be an expensive but worthwhile damage investment. It makes Lancing Steel feel a lot smoother and is a 28% more multiplier for our Impale damage. If you want to upgrade your weapon, you're looking at something that has crit and over 650 PDPS. I personally don't think it's worth trying to craft something like this since we don't have harvest crafting, and that's why I'm just sticking with Terminus S for now. Now for some rapid fire, frequently asked questions. Why don't you use XYZ melee related passive support item? All steel skills are not melee skills. Yes, they do use melee weapons, however they are 100% projectile skills and do not benefit from most melee scaling. Why two-hander? I prefer two-hander because of how the ammo-like system of steel shards work. The faster you attack, the more frequently you need to reload with Call of Steel. Why swords? Swords are really great for crit chance, especially with Terminus Est. Crit really allows you to ramp up the damage, and we don't want to be ZDPS. What about another ascendancy? Champion's Master of Metal granting 2 additional Impale hits is massive, basically 40% more Impale damage. It's really nice, especially for the 2 additional shards that you can recover off of bosses. Why Fortify Ascendancy? Trusting yourself to Leap Slam or Vigilant Strike for Fortify is just too risky in a league full of fast damage from things like Heist. If you want to go Worthy Foe, then by all means, but Perma Fortify is amazing. Lastly, let's talk about leveling. I level with Shattering Steel mostly, but that was because Splitting Steel was bugged on League launch. I'm sure that Splitting Steel would likely do well for clearing most enemies, and slapping in Shattering or Lancing for bosses would be nice. I also highly recommend the following weapon progression: a rare two-hander with Fizz damage into Shiver Sting, and then Edge of Madness, and finally Terminus Est. Someone in my chat did mention that they made it all the way to maps with Shiver Sting, but I wouldn't recommend that. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask in the comments below, pop in the Discord, or come by the stream at twitch.tv/DonTheCrown. Thanks so much for watching my guide.